I had no way of knowing if it was true or not, so
Right.
he's the caretaker. He's the person that I have to trust to feed me and all this stuff. I had no other resources available. So I tended to glorify him for a period of time. It wasn't until after I started the deprogramming years later, at Meadowhaven, that I actually was able to start to process the anger.
100% of the proceeds gained from this monetized episode will be donated to sciencesaves.org. Thanks for listening. Andy, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate having you on the podcast, and I'm really excited to get you and your story out in front of the viewers on YouTube and the listeners on the podcast platforms. For anybody listening, Andy reached out on my web form and just was like, hey, I've got this story. I think you should hear it. And it's super intriguing to me, and I can't wait to ask you some questions. But just in case anybody listening thinks I don't actually check that form and I don't a real person isn't looking at submissions, they are. And Andy is a living, breathing example of what happens when you fill it out. But enough of my voice. Andy, tell us about yourself.
Okay. Well, I was raised out in the woods as a Seventh-day Adventist, but the real conservative, fundamental Seventh-day Adventist. So we went by the old school, Ellen G. White's, being the prophet of that particular group. And so much to the point where my stepdad, who brought it in to the family dynamic when my mom married him, he basically hauled us all out to the middle of the woods in Alaska because of some of the indoctrination process about what Ellen G. White says in the last days, and basically fleeing to the mountains and being away from the people as everything's crumbling apart and all this stuff. And so essentially, I think he used that as an excuse. I'm not sure if he 100% believed in that doctrine, because he always wanted to go build a cabin out in the woods. So I think he may have used that as sort of a segue.
I say that's rather convenient.
Yeah. And I was 7 at the time. So that was in 1984 when we moved up there. And I had a sister 4 years younger than me. And she was from my stepdad and my mom, a product of that. And my mom was mentally ill. So here you've got a man that's 30 years older than her, taking me, 7-year-old, and then a 4-year-old out, and my mom out in the middle of nowhere. And basically, we built this 2-story log cabin, and it wasn't any sort of romantic cabin. It was,
Right.
Peel the logs, that kind of stuff. And there was extension cords all over the place, and it was just, because we had a generator, we didn't have electricity for the longest time. Eventually got a generator, but we were under I became under the indoctrination of that Adventist church. So as a very sensitive person, I'm a very, sensitive soul, or old soul, if you will, which I didn't know obviously back then,
Right.
but always sort of observing everything, and as a young person, I was so sensitive to criticism. And so when I got to the age where I could start to read some of the books that were written by the prophet of the church, I quickly became very almost like self-judgmental, like everything was my fault.
Yeah.
And my stepdad was more or less a narcissist. He was always sort of reinforcing that. So there was this constant sort of black sheep energy that I was holding onto, and it just became this world of guilt and shame. And there was no adults around there to show me, other adults around there to show me that there was any other options or any other ways of thinking beyond that closed system, that closed circuitry, which a lot of the people that are watching this, probably familiar with that in
Yes.
whatever group they were in. So needless to say, for many years, even after I left Alaska and went through several life and death situations, I mean, oftentimes it's you'd wake up and it's 20 below in the cabin or colder, you're going to freeze to death if you don't get out there and get, wood for the fire and,
Right.
So, and we live 75 miles out in the woods. So,
Wow.
you're not near anything really. We had a dog sled team, 6 Siberian Huskies,
Wow.
to go to the post office, it was
Yeah.
quite a primitive existence, but it was all I knew, then.
So your mom had led like a totally normal urban life. She wasn't Seventh-day Adventist. Then they met, they got married, and then he decided for your family, not only are we Seventh-day Adventist, but we're going to be the denomination of Seventh-day Adventist that says, it's at the end of times, right? They say like at the end of times, you should flee to the mountains, like during kind of like the revelations.
Yes, the end times basically is what they say. And then they have what's referred to as loaded language. I mean, I've gone through and studied all this now in terms of cults and, even, fundamentalist groups, they have something called loaded language, which I'm sure you're probably familiar with,
Yes.
which means that in the group, the word there are specific words in the group that are packed and they mean, a whole lot. And one of those that the Adventist is world, or Sunday keepers is another one, a phrase that's used that's basically anybody that's not part of the group, it is going to be forever separated from God. Most Adventists don't believe in hell per se, but they believe in separation from God,
More of like a purgatory type situation.
I'm not sure if it's completely a purgatory, but it's more of a sort of just complete separation from any godhood or, it's been so many years now that I've been separated from the indoctrination. I used to just know it all because I used to disassociate so bad for years after I got out of that group. Somebody would say the word the world or, whatever, Sunday or whatever. And I just totally disassociate, like my mind somewhere else. Same thing with, some of the songs that we were taught to sing or programmed to sing. If you heard those in your head, you automatically disassociate and you're somewhere else. So it's hard to stay in the present moment as you're going through that sort of deprogramming process, which I actually went through systematically, a deprogramming process in Lakeville, Massachusetts, about 17, 18 years ago, something like that.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that you call it programming, because a lot of times when we talk about these situations and these scenarios that people like yourself find themselves in, and I 100% say survivors find themselves in, a lot of people, they don't know that they deserve to use the terms like brainwashed. A lot of the people that reach out, they're like, well, mine's not as bad as the ones you're going to hear. Mine's probably not as bad as somebody that's going to talk to you. But I appreciate your term programming, because that's what's happening. Like, you may not want to consider yourself brainwashed. You may not want to consider yourself, influenced in any way, but you are being programmed. Like, they are literally inputting this data into your mind. For a lot of us, when we're very, very young and your brain is still developing, right? And like you said, even into adulthood, you have to literally deprogram it. It's like any other kind of like therapy or any other kind of, if you're quitting smoking, if you're quitting drugs, if you're quitting caffeine, you have to like wean yourself off of these things. I honestly feel like the same thing goes with religion and the mindset that they put in your head. And so many people are like, oh, I'm just so curious why these people don't leave. It's like, when you think that what's waiting for you if you leave is the horrible things they tell you are waiting for you, even if you don't believe in hell, you still think you're going to get abandoned, you're going to get left behind, you're going to get left out, your family can't speak to you, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure your stepdad probably had some very interesting ideas for what would happen to people if they didn't follow the rules. It's
absolutely,
you can't just be like, no, I don't like it, I'm out,
Yeah, and especially when you're raised in it, there's a different sort of, if you went into it as an adult, there's a different sort of experience than if you're raised in it. Because when you go through those developmental stages, oftentimes when you're going, into adolescence and beyond, and you're being indoctrinated at the same time, those stages, those developmental stages, some of them get skipped entirely. And through that skipping process, it creates more trauma because it adds to more questions in the brain. And it also is not fulfilling on an emotional self-love level, because the whole concept of self-love doesn't even exist in a fundamental belief system, because you're either byproduct of the belief system or a byproduct of the prophet, or whatever it is. You're an extension of something else, and it's very difficult to get some sort of sense of identity. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, 100%, 100. In fact, I would even say that with a lot of these groups, with a lot of these cults and religious groups, their whole thing is that you don't have your own identity. Their whole thing is, if you want to be your own person, that's bad, and that's the devil or sin, or you don't love God if you prioritize yourself and your independence over the family or the group.
Oh, yeah. I remember when I was getting deprogrammed at Meadowhaven in Lakeville, Massachusetts. I was there for a year and 6 months total, but around 6 months into it, when I first got there, I had so little energy that I couldn't even wash my own clothes. Like, I had this constant battle going up in my mind. Is this another cult? Is this something, so it requires like this sort of trust in self but if you don't have a concept of self, and that's the other thing too, is you can be going along as an adult, if you've been in a group like that, and be functioning or appearing to be functioning in society. And then when that certain something pulls on that thread, when you start pulling on that thread, eventually it's like, oh, wait a minute, who, what, who, where, it's like, who am I? And it just, I remember the first day that I was upstairs in the octagon sort of space where there's all these sort of mirrors and stuff up in that building of Meadowhaven. And I was up there, and they have a TV up there. And I remember I was flipping through the channels, and all of a sudden I realized that I was flipping through the channels without feeling any guilt. And I remember I started watching that show, what's the name of it? It's with the magical sisters, and it's they're witches.
I know what you're talking about. I can't remember the name off the top of my head.
The
Disney Channel show.
Yeah. And I was watching that, and as I was watching it, and I stayed on the channel for a while, I was just like, wait a minute, there's nothing telling me that I can't watch this. And that was one of those kind of like really pivotal milestone markers that I was just like, whoa, something is different here, And I'd be talking to behavioral therapy with their husband and wife team there, for three days a week. And it was eventually starting to sink in what I'd been through, and then I got to the point where I could walk outside without like fearing that Satan was going to get me, or, these different,
genuinely
extreme for a while,
Yeah. And so you were in it for so long. Do you remember the first like moment or the first like period of time where you were like, something is not right here? Because I imagine being that remote and being with such a small group of people, that probably had to take a while, right? Before you got any kind of exposure to anything different.
The one time I remember, I was over at my friend Floyd's house, and we call it a house. They lived just a little bit away. Him and his family lived a little bit away from us, but they had between windows, and a dirt floor in their kitchen. They were really, they were settlers out there, but they didn't have it all, together. But they were really wonderful, loving family. And for some reason, my mom let me hang out with Floyd, who later became my best friend. And they weren't part of the church, but there was nobody else out there that was part of the church. We were the only ones,
Wow.
So we were telling people about Adventism and Jesus and all this stuff, But I remember when I was over there, the way that I was treated was like with unconditional love by his mother, And I remember when I got back home, it was like there was just this so much tension and energy that wasn't going anywhere in our cabin, and it just felt so stuck to me. But I remember one time I came home after spending some time with Floyd. He went to church on Sunday and stuff, and I came home and I was really excited. I was just like, you know what, I was just like, I think and I was telling Jean and my mom, my stepdad and my mom, and I said, I think that I think I want to go to church on Sunday, and I remember Jean's expression was he just turned dark, and for 2 hours laying into me, and just reading out of Ellen G. White, give me all these guilt trips. And by the time he was done, I was no longer an independent, critically thinking young person, wanting to sort of explore. I was this crumbled pile of goo, that was just dominated and controlled and basically forced to, not ever think that way again,
Wow.
And it was just one of those moments where I could have broke free. I could have had some of my own ideas happening there and been, free from that, but that did not happen. After that, I got more indoctrinated, right? So, yeah.
What do you think his plan was after you guys grew up? Did he just think you were going to stick around and form like a commune, or what did he ever say?
I don't think it was more for him. I don't know if it was much the commune kind of an idea, but he was definitely in that narcissistic realm where he was always telling me that this is the best place to live. You'll never want to leave here, kind of thing. And he always sort of blew it up and idealized it. He wanted to build cabins out back and all this stuff. He wanted to put a well in. He claimed that he was a boat builder when he was younger and stuff, which I don't know if it was true, because the cabin sure didn't look like he was, but
he definitely wasn't a cabin builder, that's for sure.
Yeah. The interesting concept here is that I had no way of knowing if it was true or not, so
Right.
he's the caretaker. He's the person that I have to trust to, to feed me and all this stuff. I had no other resources available. So, I tended to glorify him for a period of time. It wasn't until after I started the deprogramming years later, at Meadowhaven, that I actually was able to start to process the anger. I had like this whole tablet full, just chock full of all the things I wanted to do to that man, because I didn't realize that he had so much control over my mind, my physical body, how I, my emotions, like all of that. And my mom, there was no physical touch or affection with my mom. She had resistance to that. I don't know what happened to her, when she was younger or whatever, but there was trauma there. And now that I've studied extensively post-traumatic stress disorder, because I've been on disability for that for years, I'm about ready to launch out and off of it here, I'm hoping.
That's great.
But yeah, the whole concept though is that I believe that my mom was extremely traumatized.
Yeah.
And so prior to even meeting him, so her judgment and, an ability to sort of navigate critical thinking skills, I think she was looking for a mature man to sort of take care of her. And my biological dad was sort of the opposite of that at the time, so.
What, how did you go from living in this isolated cabin in Alaska to living in a treatment facility? Like, how did you find out about it? How did you decide that's where you were going? What happened in the interim?
It didn't happen right away. There's several different sort of years that passed in between there, but basically after I graduated 8th grade, I had a teacher when she taught a couple of us students in Glen Allen, Alaska. So this is 75 miles away from where we lived.
Wow.
And what we would do is I would ride the bus, the local school bus, to Glen Allen. So we get up at like 3:00 in the morning, have to walk out half a mile, half a mile to the bus stop from our cabin, through the woods and everything. You get on the bus, you meet some of the other kids that are going to the public school. I was going to a private school, private Adventist school that had 4 kids in it. And it was in the home of our Adventist friends in Glen Allen.
Wow.
So they had daughters, the parents there had 2 daughters, and they were our friends. And anyway, there was a woman that their parents and my parents put an ad in, I think it was called The Gleaner, which is the Adventist magazine, to hire a teacher to come in and teach us. So she taught us 7th and 8th grade, and her name was Ida Wall, and she was like 73 years old or something like that. She's a retired teacher, and she had this skinny but a lot of energy and fire and just exuberant. She had, and so she quickly took a liking to me, and I sort of became a teacher's pet, and I was able to communicate with her a little bit about what was going on at home. And she decided that she wanted to get me out of there.
Wow.
So school after I graduated 8th grade that I could go to. And it's called Country Haven Academy in the Tri-Cities in Eastern Washington. And long story short, I was supposed to go to that school, and I flew over there and everything, but I went to their orientation process and didn't read the fine print or something. And they had a week in between where all the kids had to go somewhere before the school actually started. So they did a little week orientation because it's a vocational school. You learn a skill there and everything. And so I met all the kids for that first week, but I hadn't seen my dad in like 8 years, and he lived in Washington State. So I was like, I unexpectedly, because there's nowhere I could go.
Right.
So except to go see him. And long story short, I ended up living with him for 3 years, and then ended up, on the 4th year, I ended up going back to an Adventist academy, went through a whole bunch of life and death experiences with him. Things got far worse. And then I ended up getting on a motorcycle and traveling all the way over to Angwin, California, where I went to school there. I finished out my senior year. So it didn't happen right away when I got deprogrammed.
Right.
It was several years where I went back to the, because I wasn't, even when I was living with my real dad, I was still an Adventist, although he burned all the books.
I was going to say, what were his thoughts? Like, he hadn't seen you in so long. What did he think about the whole thing?
Yeah, he was very much against Adventism because of all the control. But the crazy part was the fundamentalist, but on the Christian side of things.
What?
So he couldn't handle the indoctrination that was coming in from Ellen G. White to me, because I didn't eat meat. I had all these particulars. You couldn't do anything from Friday night sundown to Saturday night sundown, and he just couldn't handle all that. Plus all of his,
he's like, listen, there's only enough room for one set of religious crazy in this house, and it's going to be mine. Okay. It's not going to be yours. We're going to eat meat and we're going to hang out on Saturdays.
Exactly. Right. So I got to admit though, the fried chicken, first time I had that in the box, in the microwave, which he ate all the time, was freaking delicious.
I bet, man.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah, but there's a lot of years that, things got pretty dark because I didn't realize it, but for years I was having PTSD symptoms based off of the extreme control and genes sort of hold on my brain. And then when I went into that experience with my dad, his wife of 10 years left him right after I showed up. So because
of that, or just by chance?
He's like out of there. And then I'm left with my dad, and he goes into depression and stuff. But that was a really intense experience. And then, and like I said, I eventually got out of there. I won't go into the details of that because it's pretty personal on that level. Yeah. But I did eventually, my senior year, I found out that my sister was 4 years younger. My mom sent her to go to that school over in Angwin, California. And Pacific Union, Upper Columbia Academy, Adventist Academy there. And so I believe that's in California. It's been years now. But anyway, so that's when I thought, well, this is my excuse. I need to get out of here. It's a toxic situation with my dad. So I'm going to go see my sister. So I ended up over there and I called up my mom. My mom didn't have any money. We never had financial resources and stuff, but she did figure out a way. She talked to the principal. And I ended up working while I was going to school there to pay off that. And then they helped some, but yeah.
Wow.
And then, so then I became more indoctrinated with that part of it too. Then I started going to their colleges, and that's when I started to break down. That's
Right.
when started to happen in my consciousness, like, because I started to realize that a lot of the kids that were, or the young adults that were going to college, they weren't programmed to the level that I was programmed.
No.
They weren't raised out in the woods. They lived in you know, in the public, you know, and so they had these, my roommate was taking me out, you know, to these different experiences that I'd never experienced before. You know, we went out to In-N-Out Burger one time and I just couldn't even, you know, it's like, whoa, this is incredible. You know?
Whoa, flavor.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, that was all sort of, that all led up to me moving to Las Vegas. I started, because I was always an artist. Everybody knew that I was an artist and stuff. So long story short, I started working for this multi-million-dollar caricature company in Las Vegas.
Wow,
because my
that's
roommate
cool.
in college, he lived in Las Vegas, him and his family. So they invited me to live with them for a while. And during that process, I got introduced to some of the casinos. And I saw this man, this older gentleman, drawing caricatures. And I'd never seen anything like this before. I was always drawing people and portraits and stuff. But I saw this guy and I'm just like, and I must have stood there and watched him for 2 or 3 hours. My friend left and he came back, you know, and I'm still sitting there just looking at, watching this guy draw these characters.
Mesmerized.
And I was just shocked at how accurate it was and how quickly he did it and all the color. And I was just fascinated. So long story short, I dropped out of college and started drawing caricatures full time. They trained me and then I started drawing characters full time. And needless to say, they honored all my, you know, from Friday night sundown to Saturday night sundown, they let me have off, you know, so I was able to have my schedule and stuff.
So you
But
still
then,
considered yourself like a pretty strict Adventist at that point?
very much so, yeah. In fact, I had a list whenever I would draw people, and I didn't tell anybody about this, but because I was taught that anybody that wasn't an Adventist was of the world, and you know, they needed to be in the church. So I would, every person that I drew, I took a little log of their names, and then I would pray for them after my work shift.
Wow.
I did that for several years, you know, and I would just go through thematically and pray for them and stuff. But over a period of being exposed to all of that and all the trauma that I hadn't processed with Gene, I got to the point where I went from the top selling artist making, you know, really good money to not being able to concentrate like 2 or 3 years later, and just basically losing my ability to remember what a person's know. You know, I went through all the training, professional training to do what I did, and I started forgetting all of that and disassociating. One time they had to have ambulances come and pick me up sometimes. I couldn't breathe. I mean, I was having hypervigilance and panic attacks and all this stuff, and nobody really knew why.
I was going to say, like, did you know that had anything to do with your background at all?
No, because at that point, I didn't know that I was in a cult. Like I wasn't, you know, it wasn't, in fact, it wasn't until after I got married, I met somebody that started working for the caricature company there in Las Vegas. And we got married. She wasn't an Adventist, but 2 years later, we ended up moving over to Washington, Vancouver, Washington, just across from Oregon there, because her parents were there. I was on all kinds of medication at the time for depression, anxiety, you know, you name it. They just had me on all kinds of medications because nobody knew what was happening with me. And I couldn't, to be honest, I could not remember a lot of my childhood. I had a lot of that blocked out at that point. So I was just as mystified as everybody else. I'm like, I don't know what's going on.
I'm
like,
just a normal guy. Yeah.
But I remember I went in and talked to a doctor that was specialized in the autonomic system. And he said, Andy, he goes, I've never seen an autonomic system like your autonomic system is off the charts. Your whole body, like I used to break out in rashes just spontaneously. I had no idea why. My whole face, my neck, everything, just, you know, because my body was, now I know, you know, what was causing it, but my body was having a remembrance of all the trauma that I went through, but my brain wasn't, because it had blocked it out for survival purposes, you know, so I could keep. But yeah, anyway, so during the time that I was married, and this is how it happened. I got to the point where I was so tired that I physically just couldn't go to church anymore. And that's what sort of stopped that process. And then one day I was on the internet in our apartment, and something comes to my mind. It says Adventism and cults. And I was thinking, and all of a sudden I just Googled Seventh-day Adventism and cults. And I'd never thought of that before. It just popped into my consciousness. I was just like, well, that's strange. So I typed it in, and all of a sudden that was where the first crack really started to happen, because I saw a book, The Great Controversy, which Adventists are known for, Ellen G. White writing. And I saw this website of the exact same book of some guy that wrote a fictitious book years before. And she had apparently, allegedly, plagiarized it. So I grew up following this, this book to the letter, The Great Controversy, her whole rendition of how, Satan and God and the war between man, all this stuff. And it's a big, thick book,
Yeah.
And a lot of it is plagiarized, and they had all these pages just side by side showing.
What?
And that just blew my mind. I just couldn't even believe it.
I have never in my life heard of a plagiarized cult. Like, if you're gonna indoctrinate thousands of people, at least have it be your original content. Like wow, that's wild. And so say that
there's billions of Adventists in the world.
That's wild. And so at this point in your life, how did you reconcile marrying somebody who was of the world when you were an Adventist?
It was kind of an interesting concept, because when she started working for the company, it was the character company. It was kind of like, I guess I had been sort of not as into Adventism, but I still, the core part of me was still there. But I was so exposed to the world by then, because I'd been working in Las Vegas. And I mean,
I saw the world.
blew my mind. It's like everybody's on slot machines, everybody's, gambling, everybody's dressed in nothing,
right.
It's just like, so I think that because I was exposed to that environment, that sort of, I guess, freed up my consciousness. I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah.
Part of it was her kindness was what really drew me in.
Yeah.
We were married for 3 years, but which isn't a long time. But anyway, it was just, the interesting component is that the reason why it's kind of interesting why couples get together, but a lot of it had to do with control dynamics. Because when a person's been in a group and they've been indoctrinated, they're very easily able to be manipulated and controlled.
Right.
I did not realize this, because I was the one
right
that was being controlled.
Right.
So when I started to sort of question her and I's relationship, and I started to question why she had all the space in our apartment, like I started, she didn't like that at all. And there was no, like, I wasn't emotionally mature enough, because I'd skipped so many developmental stages, that when I started to crack open and started to realize I was in a cult, it was like rapid fire change in me. Like I was, it's like night and day kind of thing. So I became a different person in terms of realizing. I was like, oh, wait a minute. No, I can make a choice. I can make different choices. Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah, and you become a different person. And to you, it's a great thing. And to those in control of you, it's not a good thing. To those in control of you, they're like, you've changed. Who are you? You're not the person you were. When really it's like the best thing that could happen for you.
Exactly.
That's wild.
And that's why sort of toxic relationship environment, because you don't have to be in a cult or even a fundamental religion in order to experience things.
Right. And like you said, people who are used to that kind of control, you think oh, I've escaped a cult, I'm never going back, I'm going to know when a cult's coming for me 24/7 for the rest of my life. Actually, what you are is you're like this bright beacon of people who want to control somebody who's easy to control. And the next
Yeah.
thing you know, you might not be in another cult, but you might be in a relationship that's abusive, or financial situations that are abusive, or work related situations that are abusive, because you're so easy to control, because that's all you've ever known. And as long as it's not as bad as the religious one, you think you're not in it again, but you are.
Yes, that's it. That is so true, Sydney. That is absolutely true. Because even that character company that I worked for a number of years, the woman that ran that, full blown narcissist,
Yep.
full blown. But I couldn't
Yep.
see it because I was familiar with being sort of led around like a puppy dog. Oh, Andy can't make decisions, so let's just usher him along. Let's just, Andy, go here, do this, and
Yeah.
the red flags are not there when you've been in
No.
those situations. Yeah.
And so when you Googled Seventh-day Adventist cult, you realize what happened. You realize you were in a part of a cult. Was there like a mourning period? Was there a period of denial? Or were you like, did you take off like a rocket, kind of like, oh, I'm finally finding what I've needed to see all this time?
That's a great question. And I would say that there was a period of denial for several weeks. Like, because I got on there and I looked at that. First of all, just the concept of getting on Google was new, and to be able to
Right.
explore something new like that outside of the cult ideology was like me going against, and inviting Satan into my life and all that stuff. Because at that time I believed in Satan strongly, So I would say I went through a period of denial first, and then I went back and read more, and got a little more clarity. And then what I did is I started communicating with ex-members that were on that site. They weren't necessarily ex-Adventists, but they were ex-members of some group or something like that. And I started to see common denominators in terms of the fear programming. And then I started to reach out to them and talk to them a little bit. At times I got sort of creepy vibes from them, but they may have been the people that were trying to help me. But that's the thing, is once you excuse me, there's allergies here in Tennessee. I'm still getting used to these.
Same. We're in Nashville. It's rough. It's rough.
I just can't believe it because it's not summertime. And I just like, every once in a while, I get this tickle in my throat. Never used to have that in Alaska,
Never. I moved here from Arkansas, and it's still worse.
Something to get it to, it's crazy. But that was, there was definitely a lot of denial. And also it took probably a year for, after that first sort of discovery, we'll call it a discovery, that I started to question, and then, more. And then by then, my wife and I, our ex-wife, we got a divorce. And because I started to stand up for myself more and wanted, and shared my opinions more, because I realized I was like, oh, I can have opinions now, because there's nothing like Ellen G. White and her prophet, I read a lot of her books growing up. So I was highly indoctrinated to think that at any moment, a negative thought, a thought that went against the church is going to be written down in a book, and then I'm going to lose my salvation. Sex was something that was incredibly repressed and controlled. The old school, I'm talking about old school Adventism, and which I was, indoctrinated into. So there, you had to wait till after marriage in order to, facilitate any of that. And there's just a lot of fears around those core things that make us human.
Right.
And they're tied to salvation. So if you eat the wrong foods, you can lose your salvation. If you, if you date the wrong people, you can lose your salvation. You've got to be equally yoked. You can't be unequally yoked, and all this stuff. So it's kind of interesting, because growing up in isolation, there's a lot of things that are intertwined in yourself. So one thing is that when I got deprogrammed at Meadowhaven, they use the Myers-Briggs personality profile to separate the pseudo personality sort of cult profile from your core personality. And it's sort of like ripping apart, yourself at the same time. And you sort of wonder, who am I at that point? Because you're like, okay, well, I know now that I'm an because I was an ENFP and separating from that, cult ideology. And it was a grueling experience because I could read at that time, I could read a chapter through that book and forget it instantly. That's how bad the disassociation was, because it's not to do with the church, right? So then I'd read it again, and I read it again, and I read it again, and finally it would start to stick, and that's how I'd have to read books, because I totally just disassociate. It's like automatically my brain would just wipe it out because it wasn't anything to do with Adventism. So I had to literally program.
That's
over
wild.
Yeah.
Do you think it might have been like a dual identity situation? Like maybe there was a part of you that was like conscious and religious and only wanted to focus on the Adventist aspect, and then there was part of you that was becoming more secular, and they were the ones like trying to read and trying to understand, but this other, I don't want to say personality, but like this other part of you was like, no, we're not doing that. We're doing, like the trauma separating.
Yeah, it was kind of a war going on inside of me. And it was incredibly stressful, just because, when you don't use critical thinking skills, you don't even know they exist, and you're not allowed to express your emotions or feel emotions. And then all of a sudden you get deprogrammed for a period of time, and now you're starting to feel things, but you're scared of anger, because anger is from the devil. All these different, you reach all these different roadblocks because they systematically put those little markers inside your unconscious mind. So if you try to veer away from that group, you're going to run into a dead end, or something that's going to deter you or bring you right back, or make you feel guilt or shame or whatever it is. So absolutely, it was like two different parts of myself, the new part and the old part, warring at the same time. And
wow.
And even after I got deprogrammed, I started having anger problems, and I'd really never had anger in my life. And then they got to the point where year and 6 months, that was their program. If most people are often ready to go, get back into society. That was not my case.
Do you think that's actually the case? Or do you think like years down the line, those 6-monthers might actually uncover more trauma and more like deep-seated layers that they just have better tools to deal with now?
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. Yeah. And the thoroughness of the experience was good, but I've learned something. Even after you've been deprogrammed, if you've even gone through, proper channels, if you want to call it that, that process, your body and your mind have to together with your emotions experience safety, experience situations that progress in terms of your work and career in a safe environment. If you're just thrown out there, then it's not beneficial. You have to have actual experience of your new self, just like a child when they're being raised. If they're well taken care of and they're nurtured, hey, don't touch the stove, that's hot. Understand that stove is not meant to be touched, right? But with programming, systematic programming based off of fear, there's this block that basically happens that says, oh, wait a minute, you're not good enough. There's no way that you can survive out there alone. How are you gonna, and all, so you have to fight all of that at the same time that you're stepping out into these crazy new experiences that you didn't ever think even existed, or they were of the devil. Communicating with people that go to church on Sunday would have, been not something, that you could do. So I had to go to these people and ask for advice and protection from people that I was programmed to think were going to kill me. I was literally programmed to think that at some point when I was younger, that there was going to be somebody that comes to the door, to our cabin door, and points a gun to our head and say, are you going to worship on Saturday or Sunday? And if you said the wrong thing, they're going to shoot you in the head.
Wow.
Right? How that fear. So as a young person, and those of you who are watching this, if you know what I'm talking about, those programs, especially if they're backed up by adults that you trust and that are in those systems, it can be incredibly scary. because
Absolutely.
it's real. It's like, oh, this is,
Yeah.
so that was my mindset for the longest time.
And
And
in the program, if you can remember, what were probably the most helpful tools that you had or things that you learned that maybe you even continue to work through today to kind of deprogram yourself? Like, what were some of the things they said that you were like, wow, this is it. This is what I needed to hear.
And that's a great question. One of the things that sticks in my mind that Bob said was, Andy, knowledge is power. One of the things that he said on the phone before I was flown all the way over there to Massachusetts from Washington is the first time I heard him talking to me on the phone, talking about Meadowhaven, and he said, Andy, you're reacting normally to an abnormal situation. And when he said that, it just allowed my central nervous system to instantly calm. It was just an incredible, beautiful thing to hear, because at that point I was like, oh, this person understands, 100% what trauma is, because I started to get scared of the people that I was hanging out. I was having reactions with people that I was hanging out, I was jumping off the floor, and if they touched me and I didn't see them touch me, I just literally jump right off the floor. I mean, that's how hyper vigilant I'd become with my post-traumatic stress.
Right. Well, and it's abuse. It truly is abuse,
and
like a lot of people don't think to equate religious abuse and religious trauma with, say, like spousal abuse, spousal trauma, familial, but it is abuse. And like those visceral, physical, emotional reactions, there's no difference between God is telling you this bad thing is going to happen to you if you don't follow the rules, and your dad or your uncle is telling you these rules. There's no difference. Like those same visceral responses to the abuse and to the trauma are present. It's literal abuse. And I think a lot of people, especially the ones who reach out and they're like, my story isn't as bad, because they don't think, like, nobody who's been through trauma thinks their trauma is the worst. They don't think it's bad enough. That's what keeps them from getting help.
Well, if I can interject,
yeah,
and I agree with you 100%, because that's called minimization. And I actually
Exactly.
learned this when I was getting deprogrammed, because I did the same thing when I was getting deprogrammed. I was telling them when I was sitting down with them, it's like, you know what? No, I'm sure there's other people that, you've listened to that their story is way more. And they would tell me, there's like the experience that you went through is subject to how your brain interpreted it. It's not about anybody else. And It took me a long time to sort of grasp that, because I'd heard tragic stories of other people, throughout my life. And I'm like, why is this affecting me so bad? But those of us that have been systematically tortured, mind tortured, physically, sexually, whatever, that's what we're programmed to believe by the abuser. They tell us, oh, that bad. What are you getting all, gaslight the crap out of us? And since we can't critically think anymore, and they've bombed the shit out of us in the beginning, and now they're pulling it back, and we're wondering, oh my God, what did I do? I don't deserve your love anymore. How come? Let me just kiss your feet. Will that help? Can I massage? And all these things. And then we become codependent, narcissistic supply for them. We could become an extension of them. Finally, we're just a robot, mindless robot doing whatever, until one day we break free, because we're like, you know what, this is bullshit. I'm done with this, but it takes a long time. And one thing I've learned, if I can interject this, is that because for years, I asked myself this question, I was just like, okay, wait a minute. Why did all of this happen? What is the purpose behind all of this? And one thing I come to the conclusion is narcissists create a space in us where they strip us down, just the bare bones inside of us, like razor blades scraping the marrow inside of us, basically. And they do that to get to those deeper wounds where they can press in or whatever, and just really torture the crap out of us. But what they're teaching us unconsciously is that our self-identity, our self-value, and our self-love is the most important thing. And when we finally get to the point, if we survive literally, physically, mentally, spiritually, when we get through with the narcissists and magnetizing those narcissists towards us for years and years, when we get to that point where we're just done, then we're done. Because now all those wounds have been exposed. We're just this bleeding, gooing, oozy mass of whatever. But we're now in this space of empowerment.
Yes.
We're in this space of, oh, well, all I can do now is go up.
Yeah,
So,
there's nothing else you can possibly take from me.
Exactly. And that right there is the most empowering thing, because once we have self-fortitude, self-empowerment, it doesn't matter if we don't have money or resources, or if people don't like us, or they talk shit about us or whatever. None of that matters, because we have our core identity instilled and it ain't going anywhere. Right.
Yes. And I think it's like a sunk cost fallacy. There's the people that will look at that scenario and they'll be like, there is nothing more that they can possibly take from me. So why am I going to bother getting out now? I can't lose anything. And then there's people like what you're describing who are like, they literally can't take anything else from me. Why don't I see what I can do with this now that I've got nothing left to lose? Right. Like, don't spend any more time giving them what you don't have to give. Take advantage of the fact that you have nothing left to give and be like, hey, might as well see if there's anything else out there that I could be a part of, because I've lost everything.
And that's where the healthy boundaries comes in, and even the concept of boundaries, because narcissists just demolish or run over boundaries. And if you've been programmed not to have any boundaries, they just come in, start setting up shop, activate your heart, start digging away, start chomping on it, oh, this is delicious. You got any more? And just keep asking for more. And we're just like, oh yeah, go ahead and take all you need. It's just like, but then when we have healthy boundaries in place, it's a whole different story. It's like, nope. You can't go there.
Right?
What do you mean I could go there before? No, you can't. No.
Yeah. And one of the most important things I've ever learned in my life is that you're starting to set boundaries that are healthy for you when people start to get upset. Like step one is they're like, what do you mean? This is the way it's always been. Why are you changing? Step two is, okay, fine, but here's the punishment for what you're doing. So there's now punishment for your boundary. And then step three is making an absolute scene or cutting you off or just totally freaking out because your boundary is there. So like, while it sounds scary for people to be like, well, you've always let me treat you this way, why would we change now? That means you're headed in the right direction, because like you said, narcissists never like a good boundary that's healthy for you.
Exactly.
So
and I've learned one.
Oh, go ahead. No, continue.
I was just going to, along those same lines, is I've learned one thing about narcissists. And before I used to just magnetize them to myself all the time unconsciously. Right. It's like one the other, now that doesn't happen at all like anymore, because I have that fortitude in me. They look at my energy and I was like, no, that's too much work.
Yep.
But I would encourage people that if you're still in a situation with a narcissist or whatever, run, get as far away from them as you can, because that's a situation where you have to be in a safe place in order to truly heal, and also to get an objective point of view. And some people can say, well, Andy, I can't run. I can't, well, yeah, there are situations that, it's difficult, but there's other situations where if you don't, then it's going to get far worse.
Right.
So temporarily, you might be in a worse, I've been in homeless shelters. I've been in transitional homeless shelters. I've been in psych ward. I've been in all situations in order to get away from, those damaging persons that were sucking the life out of me. Do what you got to do in order to take care of yourself. That's
absolutely. It goes back to that whole, if you literally have nothing else to lose, right? If leaving means, like you said, a homeless shelter, no job, no prospects, no family, no this, no that. Do you want the family that's put you in this position? Do you want the group and the club or the religion or whatever has gotten you here, and you want to stay here? Or do you want to spend the next few years of your life only going up, only moving upward? Right. And
Yes.
even if it's mentally, even if like financially, it takes you longer than that to get where you need to be there, it can't possibly be worse than staying in the situation that you're in and just marinating. Like nothing can be worse than that.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so what is your life like now? Because I imagine much like many other situations, you're never 1000% cured, right? There's always that little piece of you that still reflects, or still, you still work on it, like what's your life like now? How are you living?
Well, that's a great question. And I would say I'm not a success story yet, especially financially. I've been on disability SSI since 2012, I would say. I have goals. Right now, I'm living a life that is minimalistic, I would say. But I would say that in terms of my mental status and my mental health, the best that it's ever been. But I am in what I would call sort of a codependent relationship, because the place that I'm living at now, the woman I'm living with, we're friends, but we've been in a relationship together, but it's her place. So it's sort of her rules kind of thing. And I'm setting goals for myself, and I'm doing things with my physical body to be able to get more energy and vitality. The trauma in the adrenal glands, when they've been stimulated for years and years and overstimulated, I mean, I sleep a lot. It takes me a lot to rejuvenate and to recharge. Well, most people know that in order to survive, especially now with inflation, all this stuff, you have to be able to work at least 40 hours. And I haven't had a job like that since 2012. And it's not that I don't want to work, it's just because the chemistry of trauma and how it's affected me for so many years, it's been limiting that. Now, I have found, though, I recently found that I have the testosterone level of a 90-year-old. So that right there is significant, because research shows now that trauma and stress depletes testosterone. In men, testosterone is incredibly important for energy. And so many other functions. So I'm starting to get things balanced out in terms of my physical body to be able to prepare for a job that's coming up. It's a job that will pay well if I end up getting it, but it's a call service job for a healthcare company. So helping people, remind them, take their medications, and that kind of thing. It's pretty involved. It's 10 weeks of training. And I don't even know if it's going to be what I end up doing. But I do know that all the experiences that I've had will lead to something. But the energy and vitality is something that if I don't have that, then I can't really contribute to society. And I'm so thankful that I've been on SSI for as long as I have. I mean, that's helped me to be able to cultivate the wisdom and experiences and turn all of this into something, worthwhile. But ultimately, it's been a struggle. I'll be honest, it's a struggle. It hasn't been easy. And relationships have been challenging because of the financial parts of, those types of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm not a success story yet, but I say yet because I'm forever an optimist. And even though I've been through incredible amounts of trauma and life and death situations, I am very patient now. I didn't used to be patient at all. So I can wait and I can allow things to marinate. And at the same time, I'm always researching more and learning more skills. I may not have degrees in anything, but I do have a lot of different skills that can actually turn into resources. So it's just not there yet. It's a process. So,
well, if you don't mind, I would actually argue at least from my side, from my perspective, I would argue that even though you're not where you want to be, even though like you have goals, I would argue that you very much are a success story. And I would argue that one, you did it all yourself. You did it all yourself. Part of you might be like, well, if I went to that program, and that's where it sounds like you started doing it yourself before you even got there. You did it yourself. Yes. You took the initiative, right? You've taken the lessons with you wherever you've gone. You have a self-awareness of somebody who is absolutely a success story. People who aren't a success story are people who blame other people for all their problems or are waiting for somebody else to tell them what to do. And I would argue that by doing things like this, by reaching out and sharing your story, again, you did it yourself. I did not reach out to you. You reached out to me, and you even followed up. What I think that is your contribution to society. So while your mind and your goals are saying this is the goal that will count as a contribution, this is the goal that will count as a success, this is the goal, which is always wonderful to have goals and to always be up, moving upward and to always want to be learning. I would argue that especially people listening to this, like I've been told in the past that people have to hide, they have to have like a different Spotify account to listen to this because they can't be caught listening to stuff like this. Where you are is where they hope to be one day. People are listening to this and they are listening to your story. And even though in your mind, you're like, I still have a roommate, I don't have a job, I'm living on Social Security, they are, he got out. I'm learning the lessons from him. He's sharing a story that I relate to. He's got goals, he's got dreams, he's got aspirations. That's all I could ever want with my life. And I've just been trapped in this religion or this cult that's been telling me I don't have any of those things. I would argue you're actually a fantastic success story that's only going to get more successful. It's going to be like a success trilogy, like Lord of the Rings.
For saying that, I sure appreciate. I hadn't looked at it like that before.
Yeah, just look at how far you've come. Just look at how far you've come. And like that alone should show you that you've only gone up. Like how stairs are. Sometimes they plateau, like that's a step, for like a second. But yeah, no, I would absolutely say you're a success story. You're out here, you're doing as much as you possibly can, given the like mental and emotional limitations that you've faced and the trauma that you faced. You're doing the absolute maximum that you can possibly do right now. And as soon as you find a healthy time in which you can do the absolute maximum there, you seem like you are ready and willing to hit that maximum. But don't discredit your maximum because it's a lot. And a lot of people would aspire to be where you are right now.
Thank you so much. I never thought of that perspective before. So
No problem. I was just shook when you said you weren't a success story. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm literally talking to you because you are the epitome of a success story. But I also think there's also a very healthy mentality in I'm not done yet, right? I'm not done yet. I've got work to do. There's goals I want to reach. There's places I want to go. There's people I want to meet. And I think that's wonderful. But where you've come from is not nothing at all.
Thank you so much for saying that. I mean, my whole body's vibrating right now. I'm psychic and also trained as a medium. And, I went to the Boulder Psychic Institute in Colorado for, almost a year. And I've done readings for hundreds of people, so I've got different skills there as well. But it all boils down to my consistent energy. That's the thing I don't have is consistent energy. And I'm so tired of sleeping all the time. And I think I've been depressed too, over the years and stuff, because I'm not on any medication. I haven't been on medication now in years because I realized I went through a spiritual awakening. I don't know how much time we have left.
Yeah, I've got time if you got time.
Yeah, I went through in 2012, I was literally ended up in Colorado through a series of miraculous events. And I went through a powerful spiritual awakening, unlike anything to do with the cultic indoctrination, because I literally had people and energies showing up in my dreams and lucid dreams, introducing themselves to me while I was living at this building, transitional homeless shelter called the In-Between. So I was experiencing these in-between consciousness activations. And then shortly after that, I started to go to the Boulder Psychic Institute. And it just so happened that I had the resources to do that because I won my settlement with the lawyer at the time. And I started getting training, how to manage energies. And I remember, and I hadn't had much experience with this at all, but I was having all these amazing experiences, no drugs in my system at all. But it was like after I got deprogrammed, everything was stripped out of me. I was like bare bones. So when I started having these experiences in Colorado, I remember I was and this is just going to sound crazy, but I started working with the spider energy, which in the Native American shamanism energy is the divine feminine archetype, representing creativity, sensitivity, rebirth, creating something out of nothing, the balance between air and the earth, because they can travel both domains, So I used to have this experience where I would feel this, and I was terrified of spiders. This is one of the things growing up, I was haunted by this spider energy in the world. And so I was terrified of spiders, not to mention that my stepdad had this spider tattoo right here. And whenever he would get mad, he would pound on my third eye, which I wasn't aware of my third eye as a kid, and tell me to think. So it was like that energy was going into my third eye and creating this fear program that I wasn't aware of. So throughout the years, this spider energy got stronger and stronger in my space. So I started to have these experiences where I would go into these trances. And one day I was listening to this music by this band called Entheogenic, and it's a trance music type situation. I dropped to my knees and I became these different animals that were coming through. One of them was a dragon, mystical dragon energy. Another one was the bald eagle, or the eagle energy. The other one was the puma. And after I got through with the experience, I thought, oh my God, I am fucking loony. I am just crazy.
I'm losing it.
So I was living at the in-between, and they have computers up there in the mid part of the building. So for some reason, I started thinking animal totems, because I grew up in Alaska and I saw those totem poles, with all the different animals stuff. And that's what this energy reminded me of. And so I ended up Googling Native American animal totems, and I put in their meanings, and all of a sudden it was just like whoosh. I had this instant like download of what they were teaching me or going to be teaching me. The dragon was my internal power, my strength, my fortitude. The puma was about patience and delicacy. When you're balanced, basically, the puma teaches balance, and the eagle taught me how to let go. Right? And in Native American culture, that's the eagle, the talons, when it grabs the fish, it's these, it can hold on, but when it lets go, it's completely let go of, So I had no experience, never read about any of this stuff. And all the stuff that in 2012, which I didn't know about at the time, that's when the Mayan calendar was switching over.
Oh.
So as this was taking place, I was going through this powerful spiritual initiation. I started writing hieroglyphs and stuff on my walls, and I didn't even know what a hieroglyph was. I went to the library and got all this information on the Book of the Dead, Egyptian Book of the Dead, and speaking these things and stuff. And I started opening these portals, which I didn't even know what a portal was. And all of a sudden, I went back to the library and I got these books on Christopher Penczak's books on witchcraft and, the Masonic energies and all that stuff. And it was like, I was in a trance, but at the same time, I kept getting validation that I wasn't crazy. People were showing up in the physical world that I'd never met before, handing me crystals, telling me where to go over here and do this and all this stuff. And I was just like, what the, but it was this amazing experience. And then after that, I started studying astrology, and I tracked patterns, and I had no previous, connection with astrology. I thought it was all sinful and of the devil and everything.
Right.
And so I started to be able to track the patterns of when I got divorced. It was during Saturn return, which all these, traumatic things happened. And when I was going through all those spiritual experiences, Uranus transits a house. It takes 7 years. Uranus is the great awakener, and it was going through over my sun, which is my identity, the Mercury, which is how the mind works, Venus, values and love. And it took 7 years to go over that. And 4 of those years, I was living at the in-between. Not only that, I started to get information about people that lived in that building before I lived there. And some of those people were dead, and they were communicating with other people that had been there before.
Whoa.
So now I'm starting to deliver messages from people that were dead to the living, and they're sitting there crying and their heart's healing and everything like that. And I'm just like, I don't know what's going on, but this is incredible.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's when I started to realize that there's a difference between true connection, synchronicity, spirituality, and organized fundamentalist, indoctrination.
Right.
Because there's magic in that. There's just
Yes.
control of the emotions, the body, and all that. But when you get into spirituality and the things that have been going on this planet for millions of years, you're talking about ancient, organic, powerful, dynamic experiences that are going on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
An example of that is I had my mom, who I hadn't been in contact with for years. One day I'm at the in-between, I'm sleeping. She contacts me in the dream world. She's crying her eyes out and says she wants her baby boy to contact me, for me to contact her. So I go upstairs. The person that sort of runs that place, we become friends or whatever. And I asked her, she knew all about my experience. I was going through a spiritual initiation. She was helping facilitate that process because I'd read, I'd given her information about, I kid you not, since I'm an artist, one time I was having a session with her and I'm sitting there drawing a picture, and it was of two horses in this oval frame. And I was drawing it and I was just drawing it out of my head. And she's sitting there, guiding me through emotional things because I was, traumatized and stuff. And she looks over and her eyes just start bawling. And she says, my grandparents gave me that picture and it's hanging up in my house, in my wall right now.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that's when I knew it wasn't crazy. I kept getting these validations of this, and I was just like, wow, this is so, these are things that I'd love to share with.
Of course. Yeah.
Masses. You sort of activated heart there a little bit when you said what you said, and I really appreciate that. So I wanted to share just a little bit more.
That's I'm already in my head, planning a whole second episode to have you talk just about that. I'm like, how did we get to this at the end of the whole thing? How did this not come up? This wasn't even in the application. So do you feel like that spider symbol now is totally different to you now? It's no longer a fear. It's more of a guidance.
Yes. So I got to the point where, let's see, I want to make this as short as I can, but it's kind of a longer story. But I was haunted by that spider energy for years. And I got to the point where one time when I was in Alaska, it was about 4 years ago. And while I was at the in-between, I was haunted by it all the time. And it was drilling into my head and I could feel it. So I put my hand over my head and I sort of cry when I would go to sleep because I was scared. It was a scary experience.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I knew that it wasn't going to last forever. It was some sort of initiation. And I later found out that it had to do with the ancient Egyptians. When they went through the passages and rites of the dead, they had to go through and face their worst fears. So my worst fear was the spider. So it became a real fear. And most people would probably go absolutely nuts with that. But I had calmness inside of me as it was happening, even though it was really bothering me. But it got to the point where I began to, one time I was on Facebook and I saw this college hypnotist doing this sort of stage thing. It just showed up on my Facebook page one time where it wasn't a college, it was a high school hypnotist, and he was doing this stage production. And I drew people for thousands of people for several years. So I know if expressions are genuine or not. And these college kids are responding to this hypnotist as though he is a famous person that they adore and love or have a crush on or something like that. And then when he would do a certain expression or say something, he would, in their eyes, he would turn back into the hypnotist and then their expression would change. They couldn't believe it. So I'm sitting there watching this and I'm thinking, holy smokes, this is real. There's something going on here with the unconscious mind. So that was my first introduction into hypnosis. And then I started studying self-hypnosis. And I started getting into my own unconscious mind. And actually, literally, I downloaded a recording app on my phone, and which said, and I used my own voice because I didn't want anybody else's voice to influence me. I wanted my own
That's
strength.
really smart.
So I did that, and I would listen to it while I was asleep. And as I listened to it, I program in that the spider energy is actually my friend. It's helping me get somewhere. I don't necessarily consciously know where that is, but it's helping guide me somewhere. through my fear. So I would listen to this over and over again for days at a time. I'd wake up and I'd have these interesting new thoughts come to my mind because it was going directly into my unconscious mind. So one time I was laying on the floor, and for some reason I would always put my mattress on the floor, and I think it's because part of my growing up I had a mattress on the floor in Alaska. So anyway, my mattress on the floor, and I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden this tarantula, at that time the spider energy entity, was becoming bigger and bigger because I needed to face it.
Right.
And it would be on top of me. I could feel its energy. I could feel it wanting to consume me. It was just terrifying. And I remember after programming in this energy, I looked at the spider energy and I said, what is it that you want me to know? And as soon as I said that, it stopped this menacing energy. It went over beside the bed. I could, through my third eye, and it disappeared. And this little baby, innocent baby, was just there. And I looked at that baby and I recognized it as myself. Wow. And basically the spider energy was using, was keeping a part of me away from the innocence of my inner child. So my inner child could stay innocent instead of being affected by the fear that I had welling up inside of me. So it basically created a force field of fear where I had to face that and communicate with that fear, right, in order for it to go away. And then for me to have that pure essence of who I was just sitting there. And I just started bawling. Like it was just this emotional, because by then it'd been like 2 years that I'd been haunted by that, spider energy. And then I started to program in through the hypnosis very specific things where if I if I rub my forehead like this, then whatever it was that was bothering me had to go away. So every once in a while I would come back, I could sort of experience it coming back to the right or the left of me. And then I would just reach up and touch my forehead, and instantly it was gone. What that did is it created a way for me to have power over the energies that were around me. And it put me back in self-empowerment. And then I started to really have a lot of fun with it and play around with the self-hypnosis. There's a lot of story, but yeah.
So it's almost like at the end of the day, all aspects, all chapters, all parts of your life boil down to you needed to gain control. Religiously, personally, mentally, spiritually, in all aspects, you were being controlled by other people, other sources, other feelings, other thoughts. And everything boils down to you needed to regain control and decide for yourself what you were going to do, who you were going to be, what you were going to pursue, what you were going to believe. And even though you're still on that journey, and, as people do, you'll probably change 21 times, for the rest of your life. It's now up to you how you're going to go down that path, face those things, who you're going to become, as opposed to anybody else, a spouse, a spirit, a church, a cult, a school, a job. Now you're at that point where none of that matters. You're just going to figure out who you are and where you're going.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Just trust the process. And also I've learned to release what is outside of my control. So even though I've learned how to control different parts of things, I've also learned that there's certain things that I have no control over. And that's where I have to release those things as well.
Absolutely. Because it's so easy to go the other direction, to go from like, I have to regain control of my life to I have to be in control of everything. And then you spiral that way because you literally can't control some things. And deciding who you're going to be in those moments and how you're going to deal with those manifestations you can't control is also a form of control. It's like teaching yourself how to control yourself. Yeah. Like it's also a form of, it's like, I have to control myself when I am confronted with things that I cannot impact in any way. How am I going to respond to those things? Even that is like a self-control meditation.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I hadn't thought of it that way. Love your perspective.
Thanks.
You see things from different angles. It's beautiful. Yeah, it's amazing.
Thanks. I love being the outside eyes on somebody's story because and I love having people do that to me too, because they'll make a point that I've never thought of, or like I'll casually say something to somebody and they'll be like, oh my gosh, I've never thought of that. And I think that's why conversations like this are so important, because your story is going to help so many people who listen and watch this. But I think at the same time, they might write in and make statements or comments or, just like flippant remarks that you're like, oh, I never thought about that either. And it's just a wonderful exchange. It's just a wonderful exchange. And that's one thing I like about this podcast is it's the one thing I've consistently put out on the internet where all the comments are nice. Nobody's mean about anything, which is wild to me. I didn't know that existed on the internet. But well, Andy, I've really appreciated talking to you. I've loved your story. I have so many questions. So don't be surprised if I reach out and I'm like, listen, we need to do a part 2 because this last 20 minutes just blew my mind and I have to know more about it. But if there was any last thing you wanted to say to somebody who might be in a situation similar to yours, maybe they want to deconstruct, maybe they've decided to and they don't know where to go, maybe they've been on that journey for a while, but they don't feel like they've made much progress. What would you say to somebody like that?
I would say you are so valuable. Just understanding that your value is so important here on this planet at this time. Also, as best as you can, listen to your gut instincts. Your intuition is so important. And I know you may have been programmed not to listen to your intuition, not to listen to your heart. I'm just encouraging you, no matter where you're at, no matter what situation that you're in, listen to your intuition, listen to your gut instincts. If something doesn't feel right, then don't do it, right? And at the same time, have courage. When you have courage and you step up and you do anything different, you're going to get a different result than what you've been getting, right? Do anything different. Also, if you have access to YouTube, listen to solfeggio frequencies, listen to binaural beats. That will help sort of expand your mind. You don't have to think about anything in particular, but just feel into it. See what's true for you. If it's not true for you, if it doesn't resonate, then let it go, right? Just do your best to open yourself up to different options, different ideas, different thoughts, just like listening to this podcast, being a part of this podcast. Recognize that you are not the only one suffering in silence, right?
Yes.
And suffering in silence you can change that. You truly can. And it's only you that's going to be able to take that first step, right? Nobody else can do it. You are the one that has to do that first step. There's a lot of people on this planet that once you make that first step, they're going to be right there by your side, helping you. And there's a lot of services available, that provide food and, resources. It's just a matter of knowing that and getting in contact with those types of organizations. You're doing great.
Absolutely.
We're all proud of each other. We're all in this together. We're all surviving. We're all learning how to balance, whether you've been in a cult or fundamentalist, or you've been in a toxic relationship, or whatever the situation is. We're all doing the best we can, right? And we can only do that based off the information that we have. We also have to accept the fact that some of the information that we may have may not be true for us anymore.
Exactly. It may not be true at all.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And the only thing I would add is whoever's listening, your story is bad enough. Your treatment is bad enough. Your trauma is bad enough. It doesn't matter if you hear Andy's story and you think, well, I wasn't, shipped off to Alaska. So my story's not as bad. Your story is bad enough. It's traumatic enough. It's serious enough. And as long as you are suffering, you deserve to be out of that situation. And even if it's scary, because it will be, because if it's easy, all of us would have done it and this podcast wouldn't exist, right? If it's easy to get out of, I wouldn't have anything to talk about and people weren't willing to talk to me. It can't possibly be worse than the rest of your life in the situation that you're in right now.
Yes, that's so true. That is so true.
Yeah,
absolutely.
All right. Well, Andy, thank you so much for joining me. I've loved talking to you. I've loved getting to know you. And I can't wait for everybody else to meet you whenever I post this episode. It's going to be fantastic. And I'll send you all the direct links to your episode on every platform that it shows up on. But I hope that at the end of the day, if you take nothing away from our conversation, I hope you take away that you are making a difference and you are a success story.
Oh, thank you so much, Sydney. I appreciate you so much. Thank you.
No problem. No problem. And you have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Will do.
Bye.
Bye.